Hello there, sword friends. Today I'm going to tell you about these. Well, this is a this, but it will be a these in that there are two swords. This is the Hanwei Tokugawa Katana, I believe, at least that's what it is. These aren't sold anymore, so again, this is a quick video about an interesting sword from the past that you can't buy anymore unless you happen to spot one. But I've been asked several times about these, and that if they're a real Hanwei sword, because there's not a ton of literature or information about them. This is, from my understanding, a Hanwei blade that is the Tokugawa series blade, and in effect it's a slightly more bedazzled practical katana. And really, I made a review on the Hanwei Practical Plus katana some time ago, and I gave my thoughts on a myriad of different practical swords. I was a little tipsy at the time, but the main point is my opinion on them holds pretty true, in that they're a widely tested, well-regarded sword. Granted, they have some hiccups, imperfections, and they're not the best sword overall, but for the money, lots of practitioners have used them. They're a very prolific sword among the Japanese mass reproduction swords out there, and this is the same steel and overall look on the blade. However, the fittings are a little bit different, and this has some embellishments which may be interesting, and so I'm going to share them with you, and the off chance you happen to spot one of these secondhand and want to pick one up, because that's about the only spot you're going to be able to find one. Before I ramble on anymore, though, just keep in mind, I bought these secondhand, so if you were to find one new, wouldn't necessarily be representative of one that came out of Hanwei new. These are aged, these are used, and the blades are pretty diminished and rusted, so obviously they wouldn't come that way new. Also, note that I am not an expert in these things. These reviews and ramblings are just my thoughts and opinions, so take them with a grain of salt. I claim no mastery or expertise in the general subject of swords or swordsmanship, so you should take what I say with a grain of salt. Anyway, moving on with the actual review. So again, the Hanwei Practical Sword is basically what's underneath here, but what's on top is a little bit more bedazzled, and I'm going to talk about all of that right now. We're going to start with the kashra right here, and also we're going to start with the katana. I will talk about the wakizashi in a moment. Focus, you bitch. So what we can see here on the kashra is that it has a little bit of gold. I don't know if it's necessarily inlay or if it's just painted on there. Which is actually, I don't know what it is. I believe it is just cast this way, and then this top part is painted. What I will say though is that even early on, Hanwei showed some really excellent capability in terms of making fittings. Well, this is simple. It's also somewhat precise, and for what it is, which is a reproduction sword in the sub $300 range, I think this is really overall a very good casting quality, very precise in its detail. And the gold and black, what it's meant to emulate is like a goto fitting, which is gold and shakudo, which is supposed to be a mixture of, like, I think gold and copper, which patina is really black, and then, you know, just a general gold overlay. A lot of times these start to look finger painted when most manufacturers do them. So for Hanwei to make something like this, which is granted a shadow of what it's trying to emulate, but it's still at least closer to the mark, you know, for a really old sword, more than 10 years old, than most people are able to make now. So I think this is really pretty good for, again, what we're trying to emulate. Most of the time, if you were to buy a goto kashra like this, this little fitting may very well cost more than this whole sword cost when it originally came out. Anyway, we have some deep black patina on here. I don't know if this is patina or paint, though I would speculate it's actually paint and probably rub off. We have some shitadome, which are made of cheap gold, but they are not cheap gold, but cheap brass likely, and they are separate, which is, again, something nice about the kashra. I'd also note on the lines for this kashra, you can see that they line up pretty well overall. This is like an imitation leather, or maybe it's not imitation and it's real leather. I'm not sure. It has some weird spots on it which make me think it's not necessarily of the best quality, whatever it is. But the transitions, well, it looks a little bunchy here. It doesn't bite into my hands. It's a comfortable experience overall. We'll talk about the ito now, and the first thing I note is that this leather is actually pretty tight. And again, this sword is very old. It's been weathered and used, not necessarily substantially, but it's certainly been neglected in its time. And the ito overall is really, really quite tight. Underneath here, I can also make out the samegawa panels. What I don't see is the seam along here. What I often spot in these large diamonds is the wooden panel, and I don't see it anywhere, which makes me think maybe this is even a full wrap of samegawa, but I guess I don't know that for sure. In any case, the panels themselves are pretty well made, in that I can see and make out the nodules on them. If my camera will participate with me, there we go. Now, I don't spot a giant emperor node, but the nodules on the sword are actually reasonably well sized. And again, the Ito is tight. The Minuki are reminiscent of just about any other Hanwei Minuki. Again, sorry about this focusing, I gotta figure out how to do this. Kind of a muddy looking casting quality on these. They remind me of the pieces on the early practical swords. We have 2 Makugi pegs. That brings us up to the Kasha. Now, one side has nothing. It does have a slight kind of texture to it. There's a groove in the center, and then we have this Tokugawa Moan, again, that matches the Kasha. Again, the transitions here I think are really quite good, and also how it lines up with the saya. It's a pretty handsome transition here, better than what I see on most of the more recent Hanwei swords. Now I'll drone on about the tsuba. Again, this is like a Tsukashi emulated Tokugawa Moan. I believe it's cut out with a water jet or maybe cast, because I can make out a seam in between these finer cutout points, which make me think more cast than water jet. But what the hell do I know? Either way, it wasn't cut out with like a hand filed and handmade, which is what this kind of Tsukashi style tsuba would conventionally be. But you can't expect that in a price point like this. A tsuba like that would cost you more than the entirety of the sword. However, it is simple and nice. It has a nice patina on it. It's evenly done and not discolored in any spot. The moan thematically matches, and it's light and pretty and a little more zazzy than the practicals. The sayas are interesting in and of themselves. They have something a little different than the practical did. The practical had like an imitation ishime, and this is something unique, in that it is just kind of a painted substance, but you notice it doesn't show fingerprints really easy, at least if my fucking camera focuses. There we go. You can see that it doesn't show fingerprints. It's got this satin paint, which makes me think it's not going to hold up particularly well, but it at least doesn't show fingerprints, and it's very smooth to the touch. It's pretty damp and humid in here right now, and it's not getting all sweaty and full of schmutz. It's got a horn kurigata, kojiri, again, sorry about the focus, and then the koiguchi area here is also made of horn and seems to be done pretty well. The kurigata on here, also well done, hasn't cracked, hasn't gotten messed up. What I do see on here is there's some slight bubbling on this saya, which is less than ideal, but overall this saya has held up pretty well. The Wakizashi is a different story though, and I'll talk about that in a moment. The saya's held up pretty well. It slides out, I guess, easy enough, but it's not as bad as it could be for as old as the sword is, and that's an easy fix. The habaki grabs reasonably well. The habaki itself is the simple brass habaki that is on so many Hanwei swords, and at this point you can watch any old review and see what the habaki is. Now we're going to talk about the blade, which is the part most people actually care about, and the part where I really have the least to say, because there's not really a whole lot to report. This one might be marginally interesting given just how messed up it is. But in a nutshell, the blade doesn't really have a whole lot to talk about. It's relatively simple. It's a Hanwei practical blade. I believe this is made out of the same steel, which is a well-regarded, well-used, well-tested sword that Hanwei has figured out how to make functional swords out of. The downside is that it really just doesn't have a lot of character to speak of. It's made, I can't remember even what steel it actually is made out of, but it has a differentially hardened edge, which is really etched to show whatever detail you're seeing. And this one obviously is very rusty. You can make out some of the pits in this sword, which are on the off-putting side. Hopefully they're showing up in the light. Now I've taken Mother's Mag and tried to clean these up, and it didn't really work out too well, and the rust is starting to come back, which suggests I need to dry out the saya. Somebody maybe left a little moisture in there. Anyway, these are all cosmetic issues, and this is more of a practical sword. But basically it's a Hanwei practical. My thoughts on that are the same. It's a prolific, well-regarded sword at a kind of budget price that has stood the test of time and made a lot of practitioners better than me improve at their art and chop through lots of stuff. So it does the job, and I think sword-wise it's pretty good. I admire Hanwei's attempt to bedazzle it and make it a little better. Interestingly enough, I reviewed a Hanwei Masamune Katana, which is a more recent sword from Hanwei, that had a similar theory behind it, and that it was basically a Hanwei practical that was slightly bedazzled and had a different theme and different fittings. This one obviously is not in production anymore, but that one is, and so they are making swords with similar theories. I'm guessing just the Tokugawa theme didn't take off. Anyway, I find it very appealing, and if you were able to find one secondhand, hopefully this gives you more info to see if this is something you like. Namely, if you see this sword and these themes, this is a Hanwei blade from my understanding, just not one that's in production anymore. From my understanding, this may also have been made for a particular third-party vendor. I don't know, they've done things with Relics and a few other different companies out there. This may have been a specific thing for sale through a different third-party retailer or something to that effect. Anyway, if you know more about that, throw it in the commentary down below. I don't know the whole history behind this blade, only that it's a Hanwei blade. It's basically a practical katana, and it moves pretty good. The next bit to talk about is the Wakizashi, and in effect we have very similar situations here. The kasha has a similar theme, similar fitting, though this actually looks a little cleaner, a little better, a little more refined. It's less bunchy in this area. The ito is still quite tight. It shows some spots of imperfection. The minuki are muddier than the rest of the fittings, but I guess fit in the Sakura theme. The panels, or the samegao underneath, is of a similar grade in that the nodules are larger than the smallest size, but I don't spot any emperor node. The fuchi right here has a similar look. I believe they may even be the same fittings. I'm not exactly sure if they're the same size, but they sure are pretty much the same looking. And then the tsuba, again, it's pretty much a mirror image, same Tokugawa theme. The saya is effectively the same thing. This one has a little bit more bubbling in the surface of the saya, some more imperfections, but overall they're made of the same type of texture. I don't know what caused this. I'm suspecting it came from the factory, but maybe this happened over time if it was close to a heat source or something to that effect. The way the kurikata is fit is the same way. It has all the same features. It is just smaller. Blade-wise, it's also very similar to a Hanwei practical Wakizashi. And that my camera also does not want to focus on it. And in a nutshell, it has the same characteristics of the blade. Now, this blade is actually, I like the Wakizashi feeling a little bit more. You can make out some of the issues with the Kasaki, and this rust has really kind of set in and pitted. It's fixable, but this sword is not worth sending it off to somebody to restore it and polish it. It would probably cost a few $100s for me to send this off to a professional, and I don't have the aptitude to do it, at least in a way that is good. Or this is probably probably better looking than what it would look like if I tried to fix it. But somebody else might have aptitude in doing it. The Wakizashi is a little rougher than the katana, but in a nutshell, the blade has a nice profile, which is desirable in a sense. It's a little bit long on the Wakizashi side, but it is still comfortable, nimble, and movable. It's a little longer, I think, than the average practical Wakizashi, but then again, it's been a while since I've had one of those. In effect, though, same type of blade, same everything else, except for a slightly more bedazzled looking set of fittings on it. Anyway, that is what I have to share with you. I'm not going to go through and do a lot of cutting with it because I don't want to. Also, I'm not going to put the Weapon Dynamics computer up because you can't really go buy these, and I don't know that that's necessarily helpful, but I will put in dimensions and all of that kind of stuff and general measurements of these swords in the description down below, along with whatever information I can find in terms of their description and the Tokugawa theme and that kind of stuff. I'll throw that in the description down below. Anyway, that is what I have for you. They're a comfortable, fun sword. If you happen to see one and you have any interest in them, now hopefully you know a little bit more. That's all I've got for you. As always, cheers and thanks for watching.